One moment, she was the most powerful woman in the room. The next, FBI agents were snapping handcuffs around her wrists in front of her entire board of directors. The man she trusted most stood across the table, pointing directly at her. Within hours, Isabella Sterling lost her company, her accounts, her name. That night, a black single father appeared and changed everything. The 43rd floor of Sterling Dynamics had a particular kind of silence in the early morning, the kind that felt earned. Isabella Sterling had built that silence deliberately, the same way she had built everything else, without sentiment, without shortcuts, and without asking for anyone's permission. She arrived at 6:45 every morning before her assistant, before the cleaning crew finished their rounds, before the city outside had fully decided to wake up. She liked the building when it belonged only to her. The glass walls, the skyline beyond them, the name etched above the elevator bank in brushed steel Sterling. Her father's name, yes, but her company. That distinction mattered to her more than she had ever admitted out loud. That particular morning, she stepped off the elevator and walked the length of the executive corridor without looking up from her phone. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish. Somewhere near the end of the hall, the low hum of a buffer machine moved across the tile. She stepped around it without breaking stride, the same way she stepped around anything that didn't require her attention. She never saw the man holding it. Harry Bennett watched her go. He didn't say anything. He didn't expect her to acknowledge him. In 3 years of working the night shift at this building, no one on the 43rd floor ever had. He simply turned the buffer back toward the wall and kept moving. He had learned a long time ago that being invisible had its own particular set of advantages. He had a daughter to get home to. That was enough reason to keep his head down and finish the job. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. By 9:14, it was over. The FBI didn't knock. 2 agents came through the conference room doors while Isabella was mid-sentence presenting third-quarter projections to 12 people whose combined net worth could have bought a small country. She registered the movement at the edge of her vision and turned more annoyed than alarmed because, in her experience, interruptions at this level were always logistical failures, never genuine emergencies. Then she saw the badges. The room went very still. Isabella set down her presentation clicker on the table. She did it slowly, the way a person does when every instinct is telling them to remain composed, and their hands are the only thing they can control. Isabella Sterling. The agent who spoke didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're under arrest for wire fraud, securities manipulation, and money laundering. 12 people sat around that table. Not one of them moved. She turned her head toward the only person in the room she had ever genuinely trusted, Harrison Fisk, her CFO, the man who had sat 3 chairs to her right in every major meeting for 6 years. She turned because she expected him to stand up and say something, to intervene, to at least look as confused as she felt. Harrison was already standing. He straightened his jacket, looked directly at the agents, and said he was prepared to cooperate fully. The handcuffs were cold. That detail lodged itself somewhere in Isabella's chest and stayed there long after everything else had begun to blur the reading of rights. The walk to the elevator, the lobby full of employees who stopped what they were doing to watch her leave her own building in restraints. She kept her chin level. She did not look at any of them. She had spent 15 years building an image that said she was untouchable, and she was not willing to let it collapse in the span of a lobby crossing even now. But it did collapse. Not in the lobby. Later. By 2 in the afternoon, every account bearing her name had been frozen. By 4, she had been formally removed from Sterling Dynamics board. By 6, her face was on every news screen in Manhattan above a headline that had already decided she was guilty. Her apartment, the one on the 30th floor of a building in Tribeca that she had purchased outright, was sealed pending investigation. Her assistant stopped returning her calls. Her attorney told her to say nothing to anyone and then became unreachable himself. She stood on the sidewalk outside Sterling Dynamics at 7 in the evening, looking up at her name on the building. The wind off the Hudson was cold and tasted like rain. Around her, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, without any acknowledgement that anything significant had just occurred. She had managed crises before. Hostile takeovers, regulatory audits, a product failure that had almost sunk the company's public offering in its first year. She had always known what to do. There had always been a next step, a lever to pull a phone call that would shift the situation back in her favor. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time. She could not think of a single call to make. The rain came around 8. The park was 3 blocks from the financial district, the kind of small urban green space that existed mostly as a throughway between destinations. At this hour, in this weather, it was empty. Isabella sat on a bench near the south entrance with her blazer soaked through and her shoes filling with water and something that might have been shock settling into her bones like cold. She heard him before she saw him, the scrape of a drain cover being lifted, the particular sound of water clearing a blocked grate. A man in a city maintenance vest crouched at the edge of the path working a clogged storm drain with practiced efficiency. He looked up when he noticed her. He didn't recognize her. She could tell immediately no shift in expression, no double take, none of the recalibration she was accustomed to seeing in people who realized they were looking at someone important. He just looked at her the way a person looks at someone who is sitting in the rain for no obvious reason, with the low-level concern of someone who has seen enough of the world to know that it is sometimes unkind. He unzipped his outer vest and set it across her shoulders without asking. It was worn at the elbows and smelled like coffee and industrial soap. Isabella looked at him. "What do you want?" Harry crouched back down and returned to the drain. "Nothing," he said. "You reminded me of my little brother for a second." He worked the grate loose and set it aside. "He used to sit in the rain too when things got bad. Thought it meant something." He said it without any particular weight, the way someone mentions a fact they've long since made peace with. Isabella did not move to take the vest off. The rain came down harder. After a while, she said, "I had everything this morning." Harry sat back on his heels and looked at her. His expression was calm in the way that had nothing to do with indifference. It was the calm of someone who had been through the fire and learned that panic was simply not useful. "What did you lose?" he asked. "Everything," Isabella said again. "My company, my accounts, my name." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's not everything." He picked up the drain cover and set it back in place. "Those things, the company, the accounts, you think they were yours because they had your name on them. But you didn't lose yourself tonight. You just lost the things that were never really yours to begin with." Isabella stiffened. "You don't know what you're talking about. I built that company from nothing." "Maybe," Harry said. He didn't argue the point. "I built something too once, an algorithm that could detect patterns in financial data faster than anything on the market. I spent 4 years on it. Nights, weekends, everything." He stood up and picked up his equipment bag. "Man named Harrison Fisk saw it and decided he wanted it. By the time I understood what was happening, I was the one in handcuffs. I spent 2 years in a federal facility while he turned my work into his career." Isabella went still. Harry said Harrison's name the same way someone says the name of a storm that already passed, not with bitterness exactly, but with the precision of someone who has had years to understand exactly what happened and why. "Harrison Fisk," Isabella said. "You know him." "He was my CFO." She looked at the ground. "He testified against me today." Something shifted in the air between them. Harry looked at her, carefully recalibrating. Isabella stood up. The vest slid off her shoulders and she caught it, held it back out to him. Her voice, when she spoke again, had lost the hollow quality it had carried for the past several hours. Something harder had come back into it. "I need to get into that building," she said. "And I need help." Harry took the vest from her. He didn't say yes or no. He said, "What for you want revenge or you want the truth?" Isabella opened her mouth and then closed it. It was she realized the first question anyone had asked her all day that she could not immediately answer. The rain kept falling. Harry waited. She answered him the next morning. Harry was at the same park at 6:15, the tail end of his shift, eating a sandwich on the bench where he'd found her the night before. She was already there when he arrived, dry this time, wearing clothes that didn't fit her, a plain gray sweatshirt, jeans, sneakers. She had clearly bought them from a place she had never previously set foot in. She sat with her hands around a paper coffee cup and looked like a woman who had not slept. "The truth," she said before he even sat down. Harry looked at her for a moment, then he sat down and finished his sandwich. She told him about the hard drive. Harrison had a habit, she explained, a paranoid one, the kind that powerful men develop when they've spent years doing things they know are wrong. He kept a secondary ledger, a real one. Not the numbers that went to auditors or regulators, but the actual record of every transaction, every manipulation, every fraudulent transfer. She had seen him once sliding a small external drive into the locked cabinet behind his desk. He hadn't known she noticed. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Now she thought about nothing else. "If that drive still exists," she said, "it has everything. Not just what he did to me, what he did to you, what he's been doing for years." Harry was quiet. Outside, the city was beginning its morning shift change. Delivery trucks, early commuters, pigeons, reorganizing themselves along a ledge across the street. "The building is locked down," he said. "Federal seal on the executive floors." "The federal seal is on the business assets," Isabella said. "The cleaning contract runs through a third-party facilities company. It's a separate vendor agreement, unless someone specifically suspended the overnight maintenance schedule." She looked at him. "Did anyone call you last night?" Harry thought about it. "No." "Then the night crew still has access." The facilities depot was a low concrete building near the West Side Piers, where Harry checked in for his shift. He signed Isabella in under a supplemental worker form paperwork that the overnight supervisor barely glanced at before stamping. She was a tired woman who had been doing this job for years and had developed a talent for not asking questions that weren't her business. Harry handed Isabella a uniform from his locker. Gray pants, gray shirt, the company logo on the chest, a cap with a brim that came down over her forehead. She held the shirt up and looked at it. Something moved across her face, not quite reluctance, not quite resignation. Something more complicated than either. Harry was already pulling on his vest. He didn't watch her. He had learned not to make a point out of moments that a person needed to get through on their own terms. When he turned around, she was dressed. She had tucked the shirt in, which no one actually did, and he almost said something about it before deciding it didn't matter. She pulled the cap lower and looked at him. "How do I look?" she asked. "Like someone who's never held a mop," Harry said. He handed her one. Sterling Dynamics at 11 at night was a different building than the one Isabella had commanded for a decade. The lobby guard waved the cleaning cart through with barely a glance, the same cart, the same route, the same two-person crew as every other Wednesday night. Harry had done this particular floor rotation so many times that his body moved through it on memory, guiding the cart around the corners, nodding to the one security camera near the service elevator that had a 40-degree blind spot on the left side. Isabella stayed close and said nothing. She had told him on the way over that she was good at following instructions when the instructions made sense. He had said that was a start. The executive floor was dark, except for the security lighting along the baseboards, long amber strips that turned everything sepia and made the place feel like a museum after closing. Isabella's office had been cleared out, the furniture pushed to one wall and covered with plastic sheeting. She didn't look at it long. They moved past it toward Harrison's corner suite at the end of the hall. Harry used his maintenance key on the secondary door, the one facilities used for overnight access, that bypassed the executive keypad. It opened without a sound. Harrison's office smelled like cedar and something metallic that Isabella associated now with betrayal. She went directly to the cabinet behind the desk. It was locked with a 4-digit code that she had never been given. She tried the combination she'd once seen Harrison's assistant use for the supply closet people who held that much power, rarely bothered with different codes for different locks. The cabinet clicked open on the third try. The drive was there. Small, black, unremarkable. She held it in her palm and felt the particular weight of something that could undo everything Harrison Fisk had built. Then the lights came on. Harrison was standing in the doorway. He was in a suit, which meant he had been waiting, which meant he had known. He looked at Isabella the way a chess player looks at a piece that has moved exactly where he anticipated, with a satisfaction that had very little warmth in it. He looked at Harry last, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a recalculation. "I didn't expect you to find him," Harrison said to Isabella. He said it almost appreciatively. Then turning to Harry, "You look good. Better than the last time I saw you." Harry said nothing. Harrison took a slow step into the room and clasped his hands behind his back. "Here's the situation," he said. "That drive doesn't actually prove what you think it proves. My legal team has spent 6 months making sure of that. What it will do if you walk out of this building with it is give prosecutors enough thread to pull, enough to keep both of you tied up in litigation for years." He looked at Isabella. "Or, I make a single phone call tonight. Your accounts are unfrozen by morning. The charges are reclassified to a civil matter and quietly settled. You get your name back." Isabella held the drive. "And Harry?" she asked. Harrison's expression didn't change. "His situation is a separate matter." The room was quiet. Isabella looked at the drive in her hand. She was aware of Harry standing to her left, aware that he had not moved, that he was not looking at her with any particular expression, not pleading, not accusing. He was just present the way he had been present in the park, with that specific quality of stillness that belonged to someone who had long since stopped expecting the world to be fair and had simply decided to keep showing up anyway. She thought about his daughter. He had mentioned her only once briefly in the park, a name Oliver, and the fact that she was 7 years old and had her mother's eyes. Isabella set the drive on Harrison's desk. Harrison reached for it. Isabella picked it back up. "You've done this before," she said. "The same structure, the same setup. A person builds something, you take it, you make them the suspect." She looked at him steadily. "How many times?" Harrison looked at her with the patience of someone who had stopped justifying himself to people a long time ago. "Call it what you want." "I'm going to call it evidence," Isabella said, "and I'm walking out with it." Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not a chase in any dramatic sense. There were no drawn weapons, no cinematic running through plate glass. It was 2 people moving very quickly through a building they knew, one of them far better than the other. Harry took the cart and left it blocking the main corridor, which slowed the 2 security guards who came up the back stairwell. He knew the building's geography the way that only someone who has cleaned every corner of it for 3 years could. The service corridor behind the kitchen on 42, the freight elevator that opened on the parking sublevel, the camera that looped on a 12-second delay near the east stairwell. He had spent years being invisible in this building. Tonight, that knowledge was the only currency that mattered. They reached the server access room on the 39th floor, a small, climate-controlled space that Harry had cleaned every Thursday since he'd started. Isabella plugged in the drive and pulled up the transfer interface. A prompt appeared on the screen. "Voice authentication required. Please state your passphrase." Isabella looked at the screen, then at Harry. "It's keyed to Harrison," she said. "His voice profile." "What does the passphrase sound like?" Harry asked. "I don't know it. I never had access to this system." She looked at him. "But you cleaned his office for 3 years." Harry looked at the screen. Something moved behind his eyes, the particular expression of a person searching backward through a catalog of unremarkable moments, looking for something specific. He had been in Harrison's office hundreds of times. Harrison was the kind of man who treated service workers like furniture, present, but non-functional, incapable of retention. He had activated that system in front of Harry more than once without any concern. A habit, almost a reflex. He always said the same thing in the same flat tone, like reciting a grocery list. Harrison had never once considered that the man cleaning his floor might be paying attention. Harry leaned toward the microphone. He said the phrase slowly matching the cadence he had heard across dozens of late nights, the particular rhythm of a man who never thought anyone was listening. The system accepted it. The upload began. Isabella sent the data package to the FBI field office, to the SEC, and to 3 journalists whose personal contact information she had memorized years ago as a contingency she had hoped never to use. The transfer took 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She watched the progress bar with the focused attention of someone who has reduced everything in their life to a single point. When it finished, they heard the door at the end of the corridor open. They didn't run this time. There was nowhere left to run to. Harry stood with his hands visible the way he had learned a long time ago to stand when authority entered a room. Isabella stood beside him. She did not put her hands up. She stood straight and looked at the approaching officers with the same composure she had maintained walking through her own lobby in handcuffs, but this time it was different. This time the composure wasn't armor. It was something quieter and more solid than armor. The officers told them they were both under arrest. Isabella said, "I know." She looked at Harry. He was looking at the floor jaw set processing something privately. She knew what he was thinking about, the same thing she would have been thinking about if she had a 7-year-old at home. She didn't say anything because there was nothing useful to say in this particular moment, but she made a decision standing there in that server room with the upload complete and the handcuffs coming back around her wrists for the 2nd time in the same day. She had an answer to his question now, the one he'd asked her in the rain, the one she hadn't been able to answer the night before. It wasn't revenge. It had stopped being about revenge somewhere between the park and this room. It was the truth, and the truth had already left the building. The data hit every inbox at 4:47 in the morning. By 6, the FBI field office had opened a secondary investigation. By 8, the SEC had issued a freeze on Harrison Fisk's personal accounts and flagged 3 offshore entities that had not previously appeared in any public filing. By 9, one of the journalists, a financial reporter at a national outlet who had been covering Sterling Dynamics for years, published the first piece. By 10, there were 11 more. Harrison was arrested at his home in Greenwich at 11:15. His attorney released a statement 40 minutes later that said nothing in 4 carefully constructed paragraphs. Isabella heard all of this from a holding room at the Federal Building downtown. A public defender sat across from her with a legal pad and an expression that suggested he had significantly underestimated what kind of case this was going to be. She told him calmly and in precise sequence exactly what had happened over the past 36 hours. His pen moved faster as she talked. Harry was in a separate room down the hall. She knew this because she had asked 3 times, and on the 3rd time, a different officer had confirmed it. Her own attorney arrived at 1 in the afternoon. His name was Richard Calloway, a compact, precise man in his 60s who had represented Isabella since the early days of Sterling Dynamics and had never in her experience wasted a single word. He sat down across from her, set his briefcase on the table, and said, "The charges against you will be dropped within 72 hours. The evidence from the drive is significant. Combined with what the SEC is finding in Harrison's financials, there's no prosecutorial path that keeps you as a defendant." Isabella said, "What about Harry Bennett?" Calloway opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "Mr. Bennett is the complication. He was on supervised release when the break-in occurred. That's a technical violation regardless of intent or outcome." He set a single page on the table in front of her, a draft statement already written with a blank line at the bottom for her signature. There is a straightforward resolution available. You provide a statement indicating that Mr. Bennett acted under coercion, that you pressured him to assist under circumstances that left him without a reasonable alternative. Given your position and his, it's a credible narrative. It closes his exposure, and the whole thing resolves cleanly. Isabella looked at the page without picking it up. "That's not what happened," she said. "I know that," Calloway said with the tone of someone who had long ago made peace with the gap between legal narrative and factual truth. "But it's the fastest resolution for both parties." "You said it closes his exposure," Isabella said. "What does it do to his record? The framing would require him to accept a version of events in which he was a passive participant. It doesn't clear his prior conviction. It simply avoids adding to it. So his record stays." "Yes. And the technology Harrison stole from him?" Calloway's expression shifted slightly, the first indication that this conversation was going somewhere he hadn't anticipated. "That's a civil matter. Separate proceeding." Isabella pushed the draft statement back across the table. "Then it doesn't resolve cleanly. Not for both parties. Just for me." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. He had known Isabella for 11 years, and he recognized the particular quality of her stillness that meant she had already decided something and was now simply informing the room. "What are you asking me to do?" he said. "I'm asking you what the right option looks like," Isabella said. "Not the fastest one." Calloway picked up the draft statement, folded it once, and returned it to his briefcase. Then he picked up his legal pad and began to write. It took 11 days. Calloway filed a formal motion to have Harry recognized as a cooperating witness in the federal investigation, not a peripheral figure, not an unwilling participant, but the central operative whose insider access had made the evidence retrieval possible. He attached a detailed account of Harry's original case, the theft of his algorithm, the fraudulent charges that had been constructed against him, and the direct connection between that crime and the broader pattern now being investigated by the SEC. Isabella submitted a personal statement. It was 4 pages long, and she wrote every word of it herself, sending the final version to Calloway's office at 2 a.m. on the 6th day. On the 11th day, the U.S. Attorney's Office agreed not to pursue charges. On the 12th day, a federal judge signed an order formally recognizing Harry Bennett as a cooperating witness. On the 14th day, his parole was discharged early. On the 21st day, on the basis of documentation that Calloway's team had excavated from Harrison's files, the original conviction that had sent Harry to prison was vacated. He had been legally guilty of a crime he had not committed for 6 years. Then, on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom on Pearl Street, he wasn't. Isabella was waiting in the corridor outside the courtroom when Harry came through the doors. He had Oliver with him, small for 7, with her hair in 2 braids, and an expression of careful seriousness that suggested she understood something significant was happening without fully knowing what it was. Harry saw Isabella and came to a stop a few feet away. He was wearing a clean jacket. His eyes were tired in the way that eyes get when a person has been holding tension in their body for so long that the release of it is almost indistinguishable from a new kind of exhaustion. "It's done," Isabella asked. "It's done," Harry said. They stood there for a moment. There was more that could have been said, probably a great deal, but neither of them reached for it. Some things between people don't require language to be fully understood. Oliver looked up at Isabella with the frank assessment of a child who has not yet learned to disguise her curiosity. "Do you know my dad?" she asked. Harry looked down at his daughter. He thought about the park, the rain, the building, the server room, the corridor outside this courtroom, all of it connecting in a line that he hadn't seen the shape of until now. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think we know each other." 3 months later, the Sterling Dynamics Board convened for the first time since the investigation had closed. Isabella presented the proposal herself. She would step back from the CEO role and transition to chair of the board governance authority without operational control. When she delivered it, the room was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not the silence of people calculating which direction power would move. Something closer to attention. The board approved it unanimously. The second proposal was for a newly created Chief Technology Officer position to be filled by Harry Bennett, whose original algorithm, stolen, built upon, and used to manipulate market data for 6 years, would be returned to him and formally licensed by the company at a valuation Callaway had negotiated across 3 separate sessions. One of the older board members asked whether Harry had the executive experience for the role. Isabella said, "He's the only person in this company who has ever had to understand it from every floor." The vote passed. The executive corridor on the 43rd floor looked the same as it always had. The glass walls, the city beyond them, the name above the elevator bank in brushed steel. The floor had been polished recently. It caught the morning light in long, flat reflections that ran the length of the hall. Harry walked it on his first day in a different capacity than he ever had before. He wore a dark suit that still felt slightly foreign on his body. He carried nothing in his hands. A new junior associate came around the corner at the far end of the hall, moving quickly, eyes on his phone. He walked past Harry without looking up. Harry stopped. He watched the young man disappear around the bend. Then quietly he smiled, not with bitterness, not with irony, but with the particular understanding of someone who knows exactly what that moment means and has decided it will not define what comes next. That evening, Isabella found him on the building's terrace on the 45th floor. She stood at the railing and looked out at the city the way she had looked at it 1,000 times, and it looked different. Not smaller, just more accurately sized. Harry came to stand beside her. Below them, Manhattan moved with its usual inexhaustible indifference lights, coming on in windows, traffic redistributing itself along the avenues, the river catching the last of the evening light in the distance. "I used to stand somewhere like this," Isabella said, "and think about what I'd built, all of it, every building, every light, like it all existed because of decisions I'd made in rooms like mine." Harry leaned against the railing and looked out with her. "We don't build cities," he said. "We just learn how to live in them. If we're lucky, we do it without taking up more space than we need." The wind off the river moved through the terrace. Somewhere below, a car horn sounded twice and then stopped. "I didn't know what I was losing," Isabella said. "That night in the park, I thought I'd lost everything, but I hadn't lost anything that mattered yet." She looked at him. "I was just starting to figure out what mattered." Harry turned that over quietly. Then he said, "Oliver asked me this morning if I was nervous about the new job." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd been in the building before." He smiled. She thought that was a weird answer. Isabella laughed. It was a real laugh, short, unguarded, the kind she hadn't heard come out of herself in long enough that the sound of it was slightly startling. The city kept moving below them. The river held its light. Here's what this story leaves behind, and it's something worth sitting with for a moment. The most powerful person in the room isn't always the one whose name is on the wall. Sometimes it's the one who showed up night after night in the hours when no one was watching and kept going anyway. Harry didn't save Isabella because he was strong or well-connected or had anything to gain. He reached out because he was kind at a moment when kindness cost him something. That's the hardest kind to give. And Isabella didn't change because she lost her company. She changed because for the first time in her life, someone asked her a question she couldn't answer with money or strategy or control. What do you actually want, revenge or the truth? Most of us never get asked that question directly, but we face it in smaller ways more often than we'd like to admit. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about someone in your life who showed up for you when they had no reason to share it with them, that's worth more than any like or comment. And if you want more stories like this one, real human, the kind that stay with you, subscribe to the channel. There's a new one coming and you won't want to miss it. A part 1, B part 2, C part 3, D part 4, I part 5.